Everyone to another episode of Everything is Attitude. Happy to have Rosemary here again. Hello, Rosemary.
Hi, darling. How are you?
And we have Chris here as well. Welcome, Chris.
Hi,
Ro-
Chris.
Hello, Rosemary. Good to see you.
And you.
So over to you, Rosemary. Would you like
Oh,
to
that was
start?
fast.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. As you know, Al and I, those of you who've watched before, Al and I co-host this show. In my opinion, I think we do a pretty good job, really, don't you think,
Well,
Al?
that's
And
that's the opinion that matters, right?
well, just to us.
To us, anyway.
And
Yeah.
we do like to have guests on. We've had guests on for the last few times. Um, and this evening we have Chris. Say hi, Chris. I know you said already. Say hi again.
Hello, everyone. It's great to
And
be here.
Chris has volunteered. If you're feeling a little bit nervous, Chris, please don't feel nervous. Don't if you sort of stumble, or if you find it awkward, or at some point can't think of anything to say, just say help, and we'll help you out.
I'll
Uh,
press that good help button.
yeah, even that. And so, I mean, I could talk a little bit about what Chris is going to talk about, but I think, Chris, I'd rather hand over to you and let you explain yourself. First of all, can you tell us why, aside from the fact that you were asked, but you did actually volunteer. So, can you tell us why did you volunteer to come on the show? Um, what maybe do you hope to gain from it, and what is the issue that is bothering you so much so that you decided to do this today?
Sure, Rosemary. Thanks. Over the last couple of weeks, there's been some things in the media that started a conversation at home, and it made me think deeply of why I have done or not done some things in the past. And the subject matter tends to be around sexual harassment or molestation or rapes, and women coming forward or not coming forward, being believed or not being believed. And what I hope to get out of this conversation is sort of the reasons behind, or the fears behind, or the things that drive us toward not standing tall in ourselves, and why we choose to maybe not say these things happened, or kind of the opposite, where some women go militant almost in pushing this sort of thing. And men are, I won't say caught in the middle, because I think the reasons why it's coming to fruition now are a few different reasons. One being that there's women who are now in power positions or influence positions that are stepping forward. I think there are men that are strong, that love these women, and they're backing them up and saying that this can't happen anymore. But you still have generations of women who in the past have been, under one of these categories: harassed, molested, raped. I happen to be one of them. And, what do you say to the young women of today, even the young men of today, as to why perhaps we didn't come forward, why we didn't say anything, what fears were driving us to this? And then how do you say sort of strong and gentle, and don't go to that militant side, don't get angry? Um, because I can remember you saying, Gray Eagle says what the world needs more of is gentleness, so how do we not be a victim? How do we still be gentle even though these things have happened to us?
Uh, well, you first of all let me sort of give a mild correction to what you're saying, because
Okay.
Chris, as you are talking, and I know that this does happen mostly to women, that they women are very easily abused by well, men and other women actually, who are in positions of power. And I think, you know years ago, it used to be very much the case that your boss could do anything and say anything he liked, or the politicians or the anyone who is in power really could do and say anything that they liked to which was often abusive to those who work for them, and mostly men, but not always men, never had to worry about being reported for sexual harassment or abuse of any kind. Now everybody has to watch the P's and Q's a little bit more so, except that it's still happening. But my correction is, before we really talk about this more so, let's understand that there are men who have been equally sexually abused, equally sexually harassed by their peers, by their bosses rather, men who have been abused often by women, and also by other men. So this is not a situation which is just for women. This is an all-round thing. Can I just ask you to be specific? You actually said that you were one of those who was abused, and I'm getting the sense that you actually didn't report it. Is that correct?
That is Rosemary, and I wondered. It came up in the conversation with my son and his girlfriend as to like what were the reasons why. I mean, I know I was a young girl. I was a very shy girl, not worldly at all, because I know that me today would never let those things happen. I would say something. So, I do get concerned about, the young people of today, and, how can we help them? But,
Well,
you
let's
know,
talk. Let's talk about I think the reasons. And Al, I would love for you to have some input in this. But before I ask you for your input, let me just say that, Chris, I do know where you're coming from, and I do know where all those men and women who have been abused one way or another. I do know where they're coming from when the abuse can be so bad sometimes, uh, and yet there is silence from the victim, because the victim is often afraid. They're afraid they're not going to be believed. They're afraid that, what if they are believed? Then what happens after that? Will everybody know? Will everybody look at them? Will everybody see that person, the victim, as the one who is responsible? And I personally have had experience of that. I worked for quite a long time in a mostly male environment, where there were certain men who, if I just smiled and said, "Would you like a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or something?" If I was, because I was in that position, there were men who would actually say to other men, "Oh, she fancies me, she likes me," I mean, and and as far as I was concerned, it was an innocent request to want a cup of tea.
right,
But I remember when I was 15 years old, and I was in Ireland, and I was only telling this story to somebody just the other day. It's strange that you should pick this topic. I was in Ireland, and I won't go into the ins and outs of it all, but my parents were also, and we were on vacation there, and uh, I was abused. Luckily, I was able to escape before anything really terrible happened. But and I went home, and I knew that my parents were very, very involved, fond of this particular guy who was abusing me. Only the once, because I ran and then I never went back. But my parents were continually, the whole 2 weeks that we were on holiday. They were saying, "Well, well, why don't you go back? What's the matter with you? Go, because I was actually, this guy had a dog, and I used to go walk the dog. Why don't you? Why?" Now I can tell you that if my daughter were absolutely keen to walk a dog, and then suddenly, like that, things changed, I'd be asking the question, something happened here. What happened?
right.
But certainly my parents were, they, just not aware of it, or if they were, preferred not to be. People just put blinders on, don't they? Um,
Yeah.
However, uh, we came home from that vacation, and a couple of months later, it was Christmas time, and this my parents were sending Christmas gifts and different things back. They were back and forth with this guy and his wife, who happened to be a respected headmaster of a very prestigious school in Ireland, and and I don't even know why I did it, but something was said, and I just, and I blew, and I said something like, "Remember, I'm only 15. He's
Right.
just a dirty old man. He's a really dirty old man." Again, if my daughter had said that to me, my ears would have pricked up, especially under the circumstances. And my parents told me that we're going to wash his mouth out with soap and water. You ever say anything like that again? So there's this fear of not being believed. You know that you're not going to be believed, but what if you are believed? Then what happens after that? Will you lose
Right.
your job, or will if you're working in an environment where it's very male dominated, very often women, the victim is the troublemaker. She's the one who's
Right.
lying, or she's the one who encouraged it, or so on. So I can really understand why women don't come forward. And again, it happened to me, and I have to tell you, I was 40, and I worked for a landlord of a pub who was the most disgusting, disgraceful human being, who tried every time I was alone with him, which I made sure was not often, but abusive behavior. And again, I didn't say anything. And the reason I didn't say anything at that point was I knew his wife really, really well. Eventually, I did say something, and his wife actually thanked me. But there's this, if I say something, will I be believed? Also, there are people who, I escaped uh, the serious stuff, because women are raped and beaten, and men also sometimes, and they have much more to deal with. And in those circumstances, it has to be very difficult, because people go then inside themselves, don't they? They sort of, hold all that anger, bitterness, and fear of, and they also feel somehow, as I did, I'm sure, Chris, as you did, do you start to doubt yourself? Maybe I did something. Maybe it was something I did, or something. Maybe did I cause this? Uh, Al, do you want to step in here?
Well, I was lucky enough to grow up with guy friends that were respectful of women. I was lucky enough to grow up with two sisters and a mother, so I had sort of women all around me my entire life, and uh, I also studied this in school, women's studies and whatnot. And the moral is like it really. Moral of the story is we're living in, as everybody knows, an extreme, patriarchal society, right? And what I would love to see and hope to see is that um, we give benefit of the doubt to women or anyone who's sexually abused, because I think we default to sort of interrogation mode, and the fear is justified, because why would you step forward when often it's not just the fear of stepping forward and putting yourself out there, but like you mentioned before, there's almost a scarlet letter that is put on anyone who does step forward, and the victim quickly becomes that person who is responsible. So
Especially if the woman is pretty or attractive or something. Uh, nobody wants to be in that situation of being abused, but even today, we have we're much more able today than we were 3 decades ago. We're much more able today to stand up and say, hey, this is you, I'm reporting you, or you fill in, you go to see your supervisor and they have to take you seriously, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's much easier today, but still women are terrified, because what if you have to go to court, and then what if your name is plastered all over the newspapers, and all of a sudden the victim is even more victimized. Chris, would you agree with that?
I would agree. And, I'm sitting here thinking of, I had two circumstances happen to me. And one of them, I actually gave the benefit of the doubt to the guy. I mean, it was a situation with a teacher, and we were on an event outside of school where we ended up, the whole class that went with this teacher got caught in a rainstorm, and we were camping out and all our stuff got wet, and he took us to his parents' home, and all the kids slept on the floor that night. And I can remember waking up and having him next to me with his hand around me. And I remember turning over quickly and saying to the girl next to me, hey, what's he doing here? But I remember giving him the benefit of the doubt, like, all right, maybe he thinks he's sleeping next to his wife or girlfriend. But I think in my head now, like, how ridiculous that thought is. But, as a 15 or 16-year-old girl, what kind of worldliness and knowledge do you have back then? So I think there's a lot of young girls out there that maybe also give benefit of the doubt, that just don't have that experience to go, hey, this isn't okay, that's not normal.
Well, I think, all right, let's turn this to what this show is about, because I think first of all I'd like to say to anyone out there who is having an issue, anyone out there who simply, for whatever reason, doesn't matter what the reason is, whatever reason you cannot say something, or you feel you cannot say something. I said something to my parents and I was told I got a filthy mouth, wash it out with soap and water. I mean, the responses are not, if you open up and you do say something, the responses are not always what you would hope them to be, and sometimes people are actually called liars because the person they're accusing is the most respectful. In my case with the school teacher in Ireland, it was only a few months later that the headlines hit, and this very, very well respected headmaster had been doing this for something like 25 years, and it took one kid in the school to say something, and then all the other kids, even kids who had left that school and were now grown-ups, and the amount of kids who actually came forward to say that. Of course, my parents never mentioned it to me. They received this newspaper in the mail, and there it was, big headlines, but they never ever addressed it with me. They never said to me, well, come sit down and tell us what actually did he do. For all they knew, I could have been really raped. But again, it's like there are people out there, and it's not because it was a long time ago, but there are people still out there who just do not want to accept that their husband or wife, teacher or priest, or the politician or the comedian or the whoever it is that they revere or they respect or what have you. People just do not want to believe or to accept that this is possible, that this can happen. So you cannot change other people's attitudes. You can only change your own. You can only, how do you get through it? But whether you are believed or not, as you said, sort of a while ago, how do you retain your strength? How do you make sure that you aren't this person who's literally gone inside themselves, has buried themselves inside, has no confidence because of what happened, has so little self-esteem because of this happening? How do we help those people to stay strong to not become angry and not to become bitter, because I know, and you know, Chris, when you start to think about it and you realize what happened, it's an easy thing to do to get angry. It's an easy thing to develop this bitterness and this anger, because it's easy to blame then what happened to you on everything else that goes wrong in your life. Would you say that, Chris? There is a
I
tendency.
agree, and I think you can also go into shame, for not even a good reason.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you feel less. You feel a lesser person. You feel a lesser woman. How do you ever trust anyone again? How can you
Right,
possibly trust anyone again? And how can that? How can you, as you said, remain strong and yet gentle, and also giving the benefit of the doubt, which is so important? How can you do that and yet still protect yourself, and yet still, become a whole person? Al?
right.
Yeah, I mean, it's something where the response that you have to something like this, I can never imagine what women go through. I can only have conversations with women and be empathetic.
But
Uh,
also not just women. Understand that.
right, right. But I think you become almost guarded. Not almost, you become guarded, right? Because you don't want
Absolutely.
to be exposed to what's happened to you, right? And that makes it hard to come out, but it also makes you retract really easily when you do come out, because you're already guarded and worried about what people are thinking. And as soon as you say something, if it's like interrogation, or you're getting questioned on it, or it's getting judged by everybody around you, you retract really quickly too. So I think, with any kind of this situation like this, you really have to, maybe one of the recipes, Rosemary, is to understand, or to realize, and be okay with, at some level, that the reactions that you're going to get, or the possibilities of the reactions you're going to get, when you do come out with something like this. And Chris, just you talking about this, and Rosemary talking about this, it's not it can't be an easy thing to do. So uh, you guys sharing it, hopefully helps other people in the same situation as well. But just to understand that people are going to, the society we're living in, the people are going to react in a certain way, may help people to come out, because they sort of know what they're going to go up against. Maybe that's
You
one
know,
of the recipe.
one of
Yeah.
the thoughts I'm having, which is a ridiculous thought, but as we're talking, we've got, two women, and then we've got this, guy here sitting listening to something that it usually is only talked about amongst women, or in groups where, if men have been abused, there are groups that is usually, this is not a subject that is usually in an open forum. It's usually, and I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I wonder if we're making Al uncomfortable by talking about this. Are we actually making you uncomfortable?
Well, honestly, I mentioned before, like, I grew up, around women. I've had women as friends, my whole life, so it's not making me uncomfortable. I've studied this as part of my degree, so I've been kind of around this a lot, and I'm not uncomfortable, and I'm impressed that you guys are able to talk about it. So no, not at all.
All right, so Chris, help me out here
All
a
right.
little bit. So you seem to be, as we're talking about this, as do I. I'm very comfortable talking about this. Actually, I've written about it and I've talked about it because I think it's a very necessary thing. If something happened to you, you share it with other people, and all of a sudden, those people who are listening don't feel so alone. If it happened to her, you know, how can it happen to her? If it's happened to her, then of course it can happen to me. I mean, everybody thinks I'm so well protected and that these things are not going to happen to me, but that's not the truth at all, because there are times when we have to, we're all human and we have to go through these things. But you seem to be very strong, Chris, and I know in lots of ways you are. You seem to be very okay with this, but I'm sure that there's been a lot of damage done. Have you dealt with it? If you've dealt with it, how did you deal with it? How did you deal with your situation? What do you think are the things that helped you to let's first of all say, have you come to terms with this? You may not have. You may be sitting here telling me that you haven't come to terms with it. So, have you come to terms with it? And if you have, what were the things that you think helped you to do that?
Well, in many ways, I think that giving the benefit of the doubt in some ways saved me, because then I could stay away from those really high or hard emotions, the anger and the bitterness and things like that. By giving the benefit of the doubt, I could go, well, maybe he really didn't know. And that's, me saying it back on my 15, 16-year-old self, where my 50-plus-year-old self is kind of going, boy, you were just way too naive there. But I think it saved me, benefit of the doubt. There'll still be triggers at times. If you see a movie that has that violent sexual harassment, rape sort of piece to it, and I'm thinking, wow, they're calling this entertainment. That certainly isn't entertainment. So there'll still be triggers out there. But I think, if you will, one of the tools I used is, I think back to my younger self and say, if what I know now, if I knew then, I would have been able to use it. I just didn't know. And I'm okay with that, because life is about, growth and maturity. And I just know today that I would not allow it. And I think just by being on this show and being able to discuss it, I'd like to think the good tool is we're bringing it out more into the open and talking about it. And maybe I can save another 15-year-old from going through this, man or woman, youngster or not.
Well,
I got to feel good about that.
if I go back to my the first situation that happened to me, I think I certainly wasn't giving the benefit of the doubt, because there was no doubt that what he was trying to do was exactly what he was trying to do. He was trying to sexually abuse me, and luckily I was fast. I was small, first of all, very small, and I was fast. So I was able to take him off guard and shove him. So he tripped, first of all, and then I ran. So I was fast. Um, I remember being very frightened by the whole experience. I was a naive 15-year-old. I was very scared. And I know that there are people out there who've been abused who were also in those circumstances very, very scared, and sometimes don't even know what you're scared about. But I was very, very scared, and I knew that I'd had a very, very lucky escape, which unfortunately many people don't. They don't have that.
Right.
But I think so. I was very scared, and I left Ireland. And over the next few weeks or so, every time I thought about it, I just tried to block it out. So there was this definite, uh, let's pretend it didn't happen. You try to block it out because you really don't want to think about it. But then, and especially when, and I told my family, and their reaction, the fact that they didn't believe me was not a surprise. However, what started the anger was when they saw the newspaper. It was written everywhere, and this guy actually ended up in prison for what he'd done for years and years. I mean, whether he actually ever came out or not, I've no idea. But the anger at the whatever it was, indifference or burying your head in the sand, let's pretend it didn't happen, or they still think I'm a liar, whatever it is, the anger from my parents' response, or with as far as the newspaper is concerned, non-response, the anger did certainly build inside of me, and the anger towards my parents, and the anger towards the fact that uh, they thought that I was a liar. And then that anger sort of started to eat away. I didn't have much self-confidence anyway, so it started to eat away at all the self-confidence, the self-worth. When I started dating, that was awful, because then you go through the dating process, and giving the benefit of the doubt is all well and good, but how do you respond? You want, when you date someone, you want them to kiss you, but you don't want them to take advantage. So I was a very confused girl for a long time, for a long, long time. All
Well,
right.
trust is
So,
eroded.
pardon?
Trust is eroded.
The trust is gone. It's not just it's the trust in your parents. It's the trust in the people who you're telling your story to, who choose not to believe you, or they choose to whatever they ignore you. The trust for future boyfriends, future husband, whatever, all of that, and it lasts for years. So, all right, if somebody is going through this, and this might be something that happened to them 30, 40, 50 years ago even, or it might be something that just happened last week, however long ago, let's see if we can find a recipe to help those people who really, it's not about telling the world. It's not about going to court. It's not about sort of making a big deal of it necessarily. One of the ingredients that I would certainly have in this recipe is, to talk about it, to talk. Okay. The next ingredient that I would have here is to look at yourself and start to develop the knowledge within yourself that it wasn't your fault. There was nothing that you did that justifies what happened to you. So, talking, the understanding that it's not your fault, not an easy thing at all, I have to tell you, but still, it's one of the ingredients that we're putting into this pie. So, talking about it, understanding the no fault. Either of you can come up with any other ingredient that we have here?
I think, especially if you've been traumatized and you can't get over it, getting some professional help,
Getting
whether,
help.
one
Yes,
on one or with a group setting.
yes. But that's really talking. We've already got that ingredient, because we want the ingredients and then we're going to discuss what we need to do with them. So while you two are thinking of a couple of other ingredients, maybe I'm going to talk to address these two ingredients and what we might do. What is the method? What is the mix that we need to do? So you need to talk. You need to, first of all, you can find a group, you can find a therapist. If you have a good friend, you need to find someone or a group of someone's who have maybe been through the same or similar, and as afraid as you might be of stepping foot in that place, and of course you are going to be very nervous about it, because let's face it, you've already been told it's your fault, or you already feel that it's your fault. So walking into a group of strangers and actually being able to talk about this it's very brave. So that's another ingredient, bravery. So we need to talk, we need the no fault, and we need bravery. And if we can sort of find a way to put all those three things together. So finding a group, this is the method that we're going to use in this lovely cake that we're making. Find a group, find a person who can lead you to a group. If you have a good church, even if you don't have a good church, find a church. If that works for you, find a minister or a priest or someone or a doctor who you can go to them and say, I need help. That's, it's brave, but the one thing you have to do with this brave ingredient, this ingredient of bravery, is take a deep breath and just take the first step, because the first step is going to be the hardest for you. The first step is going to be the most difficult for you. Okay. Learning how to understand that it's not your fault. If you can find that group, if you can find that doctor, those people will help you to understand. It is never anyone's fault. Please listen to me, all of you out there who have gone through this or are going through this. Even if it happened 50 years ago, you still will feel that guilt. If I hadn't worn that short skirt, if I hadn't gone out that late at night, if I hadn't gone off with my friends, if I hadn't made myself so vulnerable, and on the guilt goes, and on it goes, and it goes, and it eats away at you. So you need to understand that no matter how short your skirt, no matter what time of night you're out and about, we all do stupid things. We all put ourselves from time to time in stupid situations, but there is never a cause for anyone, any rapist, any abuser, whether it's at work, in your work environment, in your home, whether it's in your school, whether it's wherever it might be. There is never ever a good reason for an abuser to abuse you, except that that abuser is massively, majorly flawed. They are the ones at fault. They are the ones who we wish to goodness that they would all go get help, but we know that that's not going to be right, don't we? So you need to talk to someone. You need to understand, get it into your head. If you have to say it 10 times a day, use that wooden spoon to stir this recipe together. You have to say 10 times a day, it is not my fault. And you say it until you begin to believe it. And then you have found this group of people who support you, who will help you to believe that no matter what you did, no matter where you were, no matter what stupid action you took, the abuser is always the one at fault. And those who are abused are the victims. And abusers just know to find those of us who are weak or in a weak situation or in a weak spot. Okay,
Rosemary,
so
and
yeah.
Rosemary, and each of those lead into one another, right? If people are
Yes.
talking, it'll help them to be brave. It'll help them to be able to tell themselves and get support of others telling them, "Hey, it's not your fault. It's not my fault," and kind of repeat that to themselves every day with that support group. It kind of has this exponential effect, this cyclical effect to up.
Exactly. You know, I remember, and I'm not sure actually. I have to think about that. Don't have time to think about it. But I remember there was a moment in my life, as there is always a moment in anyone's life who has been abused. I came from an abusive family. I know what it is to be abused as a child. I came from an abusive husband. He didn't beat me, but boy, he might just as well have, because his words and his actions beat me to a pulp. There are different ways of abusing people, and there are a lot of men and women who don't realize that their mean or vicious words are abusive and dangerous and cruel. So wherever you sort of come from, you have to, I think, there's a point where I decided, am I with my family, I listen to people all the time saying, 50-year-olds saying, and maybe you listening are out there, maybe you're one of these people, 50 years on, they're still talking about when their, father didn't let them, go out at the weekends, or didn't let them do whatever it was. There comes a time, there comes a point in your life, you have to decide, are you going to be the victim or not? And there was a point in my life, and I'm not quite sure when it was, and I bet Chris, there was a point in your life too where you decided, you know what, I don't want to be a victim. You can be
Absolutely.
you can be the victim and be miserable, or you can be the victor. And I chose to be the victor, not not over the abuser, not over other people, but I chose to be the victor of my own life. There's your attitude.
Right.
My attitude, my positive attitude, drove me to the point where I said, I'm not, I'm not going down that road, because that is just negative, 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 negative. I am going to be the victor of my own life. I am going to win for me. Would you say, Chris, that there was a point where you decided, I don't want to be a victim anymore?
Absolutely. And I feel so much better for it. It doesn't wipe away what happened, but you are just in an entirely different mind space to say, and I still survived. You know, it's you're not the victim, and you're more than a survivor. It's just, I don't know, it's a neutral place. It's a place that feels so much better.
I also think, and I'd like your opinion on this. I also think very much, I'm very, very strongly believe that there are there are things in our lives, situations that that we come across, all of us, and we can look at them as hardships, which they often are, or we can look at them as lessons, hard, tough lessons, but nevertheless lessons. I think if we, with our attitude, if you can have an attitude of, let's look at this as a lesson, let's look at these things as lessons, I think it's, you're on the winning side. You've already changed your attitude from, from that victim mentality, from that poor me, from that why does this always happen to me sort of thing. You've already, if you can think of these hardships as lessons, even though you don't necessarily want them, it's like the gift that you really would like to return. It is a gift. These things are a gift that you don't want, but having been given them, your attitude, now you have to decide, I've got this gift, do I live, moan, complain, and make myself miserable, or do I take a look at this gift? Do I take a look at this and think, what what do I learn from this? What can I learn from this?
But Rosemary, going back to that third ingredient of bravery, right? I mean, bravery is not this static decision, right? That you just say, "Hey, I'm going to be brave."
No.
It's coming to grips with whatever happened to you, and this has got to be up there with, if not the most difficult, one of the most difficult things to come to grips with and be okay with, right? And I can't imagine it. But with being brave and sort of coming to grips with what we're talking about, I think that is one of the most important things you can do. Come to grips, be brave, and just sort of see it with clarity too, and move on from it. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do, but it's an essential piece or a part of the recipe that if you
Part of the pie.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, it's if you don't do that, you'll do that retraction that I talked about before, right? And you'll go back into and retracting into your own space is where the attitude can go poorly, because then you start getting angry, you churning, you're going over things. It's your fault. I'm helpless. I'm the victim. So sustaining that bravery, which is probably the biggest challenge, is so important to maintain that positive attitude through whatever crisis you're going through. And like I said, this is probably one of the most, if not most difficult crises that anybody can go through in
Yeah.
life.
Well, bravery is usually spontaneous. You see something happen and you take an action, you don't even think about it. People say to you afterwards, wow, you were really brave to jump into that river and save that person. But a lot of brave acts are those spontaneous actions that we take without actually thinking about them. We're talking about the kind of bravery that requires you to think, and it requires you to act even though you're trembling in your boots. And we're talking about the kind of bravery that you have to think about, and maybe you have to rev yourself up to. Maybe it might take you a few hours or a few days or a few weeks to actually take that first step to either go to your doctor, your priest, your therapist, your whoever it is, you're confident. Taking that first step, that's where your bravery is matters the most, because once you have taken that first very brave step, and you start to open up to a person, make sure it's a person that you can trust, make sure it's a person who you know is going to listen. The worst thing is to tell somebody who will then turn around and call you a liar or your whatever, or not believe you. So you need to be very careful about who you go to. And there are many groups in every town and in every city, even in the little towns and villages. There are many groups of people who have gone through exactly the same thing that you've gone through, exactly the same thing that you went through, Chris, exactly the same thing that I went through, and worse. Because really, if you
Oh God,
think of
yeah.
all the awful stuff that can happen to a person, we got off pretty lightly one way or another. But nevertheless, that first step requires that bravery. And how are you brave? This is what you do. You throw it into the bowl and you keep stirring it and stirring it and stirring it. You go around and around in your head until all of a sudden you'll explode if you don't take that first step. You know you have to do it. You know you have to do it. You can do it on your own, or you can call a friend, or just email me. I'll encourage you. I'll help you. I can help you to help yourself. But that first step of bravery goes into the mixing bowl. You take that step, which requires talking. That's the second ingredient in the bowl. And the third ingredient in the bowl is, can you remember, guys? I do this to you every time.
Well, well, you're saying bravery, and it just makes me think maybe it's more courageous, or they're parallel. Courage for stepping up, courage for acknowledging,
Well,
but
that's
also
the same
courage
thing.
for crawling inside yourself and not being who you are meant to be.
you so here are the ingredients. I sort of tie courage and bravery together, but
Yeah,
maybe
no, I get
maybe
that.
maybe they're not. But courage, you've got to have the courage to be brave. So
Yeah.
that's another ingredient. But also, talking about it and understanding, this is the most important thing that you will all need help with. But if you have the right attitude and a positive attitude, you can achieve whatever you want to achieve. It is not your fault. The lack of guilt that has to go into the pot, no matter what. You say it to yourself a dozen times, 30 times, 50 times. There are people out there who've been saying it for 50 years, but you've got to say it and then you've got to mean it. But it's no good saying it and meaning it without those other ingredients, because it's those
Right.
other ingredients which will help you to understand. And you'll hear other people say it, and you'll hear other people's stories, and all of a sudden it will resonate with you. It is not your fault. I would like to take a moment to say to all of those brave men and women out there who have come forward, you notice I use the word brave, good for you.
Yeah.
And those people who have come forward are a wonderful example for other people. However, even though we see other people coming forward, it's very scary for us to come forward. It's very scary to see what reactions, and it's, I know there are lots of people listening to this saying, well, it's all right for them because, they have money or they have support or they have, influence or whatever it is you think that other people have that you don't have. But you only need these ingredients. You need to talk. You need to say to yourself 1,000 times if necessary a day, it is not my fault. You need to have an understanding that you are a victim. You did not ask for this yourself, even if you did a stupid thing or made stupid decisions about where you were or who you trusted. It's not your fault. This most important thing. You need to have um, courage. And if you put all those things together, and if you are brave and you put all those things together, they all need to go together. One thing is not going to do anything really to make this cake work. All those three ingredients. And if you go to someone and you talk to someone and you take that first brave step, then you're on your way to achieving a real peace and harmony within yourself. You then, the bitterness goes away, the anger goes away, the understanding. And what is most important, once you start to understand that it wasn't your fault and that you can do something about this and that you are a good person, that you're a great person, you begin to not only be sympathetic towards other people who have done the same thing, but you become more empathetic. In other words, you become kinder, right?
Right.
You become braver. You become a gentler person because you understand, because you've been through it, you understand and you can reach out to others who are suffering and who don't know how to heal themselves. Chris, do you want to say any more about this before we?
Well,
Time is
I
running out
really
for
appreciate
us.
I really appreciate your time, Rosemary and Al. Even though I think you said you really hadn't been exposed to this before, I think you make a really great backdrop for all of this. And there's plenty of strong women and strong men who can help support people who've gone through this, and thank goodness for them. I just think it's a really timely subject.
Well, thank you for coming on. Al, do you want to say any more before we actually
No,
close
we,
today?
we have a couple comments. Do you want me to just read those?
I would very much like to hear the comments. Yes, I wish
Um,
we had more time for more, but we don't. But still, let's go with the
we could
comments,
just do
shall
one or two. Irene says, "Thank you. Even now, when listening, I realize that still, I feel if I don't, and it's happened to me in the middle of the '70s. So I think
we?
she's
Oh,
saying that she hasn't said anything. It sounds like it happened to her a long time ago. But like you mentioned, Rosemary,
that's almost 50 years, 40, 50 years ago.
it just probably speaks to how much it impacts a woman. That it's still so prevalent in her mind this many years later. Uh,
Irene, I hope you can have some bravery, darling. I know, I trust that you can. You got to trust in yourself. That's the damage that this does to us. It denies us trust in ourselves. You've got to build that trust up, darling.
Mitchell says, "Wonderful advice. Thank you for sharing." We did have Agnes say, "What if?" And I know we don't want to get too much into this, but what if someone is accused of abuse and did not do it? And I don't think
Yeah,
we're talking about.
and let me tell you, that happens much more than you would think.
It
And
does.
we'd love to hear from people who have been accused of this kind of thing and other things when they are absolutely not guilty. Today we were simply talking about women who, and attitudes with those men and women who have been abused, who really, they know there is a guilty party, there is an abuser, and there is a victim, but Agnes, maybe you'd like to write in, or maybe you'd like to come on the show and talk about that side of things, because there is another side of things. There really is.
And that muddles things even more, Rosemary. Unfortunately, the unfortunate event and times when that happens, that makes it even more complex.
Well,
Right.
it actually, unfortunately, it's sort of, you can understand why there are people who don't believe, that somebody has been abused. But it's not about accusing other people. It's not about, especially if this is something that happened to you a while ago, you cannot ever bring the perpetrator to justice. It's about what you do with yourself
Mhm.
and how you live your life and how you stay strong and how you find that kindness and gentleness in you and how you can deal with what has gone on with you, and to understand that these are lessons and we have become, through these uh, experiences, much more empathetic and much kinder.
So Irene said thank you, and Agnes said thank you so much as well.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. Of course, Al and I will be here again next week. I have a topic in my mind for next week. I want to talk about people's attitudes towards uh, the dying. We're going to specifically next week talk about pets. What do we do when we know our pets really need us to do something for them, and then we don't because we can be so selfish about it. But also, if anybody out there has a situation whereby you had to make a decision with a loved one, whether it be an animal or a person, if you had to make a decision about a loved one where you had to take them off of a machine and you go back and forth and back and forth, and the guilt and the trauma that goes along with all of that, we'd love to hear from you, because we
Rosemary,
are.
if someone's in the midst of that decision as well, right?
Yes, we'd love to hear from you, because we'd love to be able to help if we can. All right. Al, thank you so much for being my lovely co-host. Chris, thank you, thank you, thank you. You were wonderful and very brave. You took a brave step. And it's all about taking that brave step and talking about it openly. And I hope we've helped you in some way or another. But I think that you've been an inspiration to other people listening, who are going to be listening to this. Everything is attitude. If you want to know more about us, if you want to volunteer for the show, Al is going to be stunned by the fact that I actually know the email info. And you're going to put it up there right on the screen
Yep.
now. Info at everythingisattitude.com. Please feel free to participate. Please, sorry, I'm getting tongue tied. Please feel free to, if you want to volunteer, or just email us and tell us about your experiences, because we do go and check in the emails quite often, fairly often, at least 2 or 3 times a week, I know. If you need to know more from me, or you don't want to call the info everything is attitude, my email is rosemary at rosemaryaltair.com. Al, do you want to give your email out, or don't you care?
Yeah, Al at alpazano.com. Yep.
There you are. Pisano, Pisano.
Correct.
I got that right. So
Yeah.
thank you everyone for watching. Until I see you again, could we please have a great, wonderful, positive attitude going forward for the week? And until we see you again next week, please, please, please have a very, very, thank you for watching, by the way, blessed day.